All right, we are right at 1 o'clock. Hello, everyone. I almost said good morning. I hope everyone had a great lunch. I am Sherry Belson, and I will be your moderator for this session. Parent Voice Matters: Lifting Families' Experience in South Carolina's Early Childhood System. Today, our presenters are Rachal Hatton-Moore from South Carolina Early Childhood Advisory Council and South Carolina First Steps. Lexi Jones, also from South Carolina First Steps in the Early Childhood Advisory Council. And we have parent leader Lindsey Phillips, Lindsey Phillips from South Carolina Family Voice Council member. Just a few housekeeping things. Of course, we've been on Zoom many times, but unlike our main session, these sessions have live mics, so for all participants. So make sure you keep yourselves muted unless you have a question. You can also drop any questions in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on those, and we will reserve about 5 minutes at the end to answer all those questions. And I will turn it over to you, Rachal. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And it's so great to see everybody today. I hope you're having a wonderful Thursday. And please bear with me. I'm a little raspy and I might crack a few times. So I'm going to try to give you my full voice and at a nice volume. If you need anything from me vocally, just let me know if I'm not projecting loud enough. We are so excited to be with you today, and I am South Carolina's 2-generation coordinator. And so I have a really unique role. And I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. I have a really unique role in that I work with state systems to help align them and in support of whole family practice. And really what that also means is that I get to be the facilitator for the South Carolina Family Voice Council, which is my favorite part of my job that brings me the most joy. And I also feel like it's essential to the work that we do in the early childhood system, and really is a matter of redesigning the way that we operate and think about what we're doing, right? So it's all to benefit families, and so that means that families should be involved and are involved, and also engaged and centered in the work that we do. And so to that end, we started the Family Voice Council in August of 2021, and that was funded and supported by the Preschool Development Grant, Birth Through 5, that's awarded to DSS and is a partnership among many early childhood entities across the state to create an aligned system. That means that we're working together in support of families so that there's less disjointed operations, duplication of services, and that families are able to find information and have choice about what benefits them and the children and their families. So when we began, we had 8 members, and they are parents from all over South Carolina who have children ages birth through 5, and many have children over 5 as well, and are or have been involved in different programs in the early childhood system. So they've all been participants in a variety of programs, and they share their experiences every month with different program leaders for the express purpose of redesigning the programs and having programs go through continual improvement processes by listening and engaging key stakeholders about the experiences that they've had in their lives, their personal expertise, and sharing the responsibility as an equal partner in making sure that programs operate to their greatest benefit to the people that they're intended to benefit. We underwent a long recruitment process, and in July of this year, we got to our full membership capacity of 20 members. And our parents on the Family Voice Council, the members are educators like Lindsey, and they're social workers, and they're librarians, and they're college students. We have parents from all walks of life with all different family compositions, all different professional and educational and class backgrounds. And we really wanted to make sure that we had a representative diversity of thought and lived experience, so that we really would have representation of what family experiences were, and be able to have families reflect that to program leaders, so that we can make sure that we're working together across all of these agencies in the same vision as we move forward as a state system. Um, we have an organizational structure too, where we try to make sure that we don't have over representation from any geographical areas in the state. So, of course, we're in the Midlands, and the Midlands tends to be overrepresented in a lot of councils. So we do have 7 members from the Midlands of our 20, and then the rest are from the PD, the Low Country, the Upstate. We've made sure that we have a good representation of both rural, suburban, and urban in the sense that we have it in South Carolina, families, so that there's also geographical diversity in our council. Let's see. We also have rolling and recruitment for members, because members are asked to serve for 1-year terms, and they have like engagement that they've agreed on, a commitment to each other as well, to uphold each other's voices, respect each other's voices and experiences, learn from each other as we also teach the programs that we work with. And then also, we really believe that families are experts on their experiences and their children. And to that end, they should be compensated as experts. And so, families, the members receive a stipend for their service for each monthly meeting attended. And, we really value and honor that as a commitment on our end to respect the time and knowledge of our members. If you work with any agencies that are looking to speak with families, we welcome different program leaders every month. And then we also, are continually looking for additional members. We'll have terms rolling over in the next several months and might have openings. Members are also able to recommit for a second year of service. And so we have had returning members into this second term. And we've got staggered terms. So while we did rolling recruitment for our first year to get up to our 20 members, we'll be doing like 6-month roll-offs going forward, so that members are also able to have longer times to build relationships with each other, and grow in their service to their communities as well. We also believe in sharing out widely all of the feedback that families have given us, and we're doing this at the request and with the blessing and review of all of our members into what we're calling the Year of Family Voice. And so we have aggregated their feedback from across the year, across all the meetings that we've had, in ways that are reflective to the entire early childhood system and other state systems as well, beyond just early childhood. So there's a lot of feedback and input in here that's relevant to the entire education system, and we hope that you will read it. It should be released later this month or early October, and will be available at earlychildhoodsc.org, which is the website for the Early Childhood Advisory Council, which also has a number of other reports about 2-gen practice and the state of the field, so to speak. These are just a couple of the quotes from our members across the year. There'll be more, and then also the aggregated feedback, and that we hope you'll seek out and read. Some of our monthly meetings have centered around these. This has been the agencies that have been invited. And then in the future, we'll be having presentations from the Department of Education and Workforce. We'll be having another presentation later in the fall from the Early Childhood Advisor Council, us, in the development of the common application for First Five, and a follow-up meeting about data work that the members provided input to earlier in the year. And then also provide updates from last year when they uh, sort of made the direction for the parent feedback sessions that would be happening as part of the statewide needs assessment. So we'll be making sure that they have continual follow-ups about the work that they've done, the influence that they've had, and a continuing method to have that engagement, to lend their voices. And that's part of what they've asked of us. The families on the Family Voice Council lead the work, in that I do the facilitation and recruiting the people from the agencies to come speak, but at the interest and expressed interest and desire of the families. So one of the things that they've asked and will be reflected in the Year of Family Voice is that there be like a deeper feedback to them about the input that they've provided. And Lexi will talk about that more too, about how that's an essential part of partnership with families, is making sure that they also understand that they're heard, and seeing the impact that they're having as demonstration of their impact. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lindsey.
Hello, everybody. As I was introduced, my name is Lindsey Phillips, and I'm a parent of young children and someone who works in public schools. I've worked in the public school in upstate South Carolina for the past 15 years. I joined the Family Voice Council because I think it's important to look for the bridges, people and leaders in our community who are active listeners, and they have a desire to support families as they navigate the many systems. Being a member of this council has been incredibly impactful in my own life. I took a step back from full-time work in public school to part-time, and that has limited my connections with other families. And so hearing other parents' real life stories at these meetings, witnessing the organizations respond to feedback in real time, and learning new information about these organizations has been a very valuable experience. For example, in one of our meetings, we met with the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs, and many concerns were voiced in that meeting from family members about difficulties in aging out of care, or with children who had delays, but they were not delayed enough to continue receiving services. And the presenter, Ms. Kimry, provided information in the meeting on additional services and resources that may be able to assist when these services are not available. So it was just really powerful in that moment for families to voice their specific concerns and her respond in real time to what steps can be taken. Over the past few years, we've all witnessed firsthand how the pandemic has shown a spotlight into many broken areas of our society. I am honored to be a part of a council that seeks to uplift family voices and gain feedback to improve our state systems and strengthen communication between all involved. To conclude, I would encourage everyone, whether you work in the organization or not, to be a bridge builder by joining conversations that are happening across many different tables, and be willing to be vulnerable with others in your community. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsey, for sharing your experience. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And so hopefully everyone is seeing a picture of a slide with a large QR code. If I could get potentially a thumbs up or some nodding heads. Thank you. I'm seeing some. So if you have your phone handy, if you could just take it out, open up your camera and scan this QR code. And I'd really love to hear what words come to mind when you hear the term or phrase family engagement. Be really interested in seeing some of your feedback. And if you don't have your phone available, and
perhaps you're actually on your phone to view this call. If you want to just drop it in the chat box of what words come to mind so we can see those as well. I'll give everyone another moment and then I will switch this over so that way we can see some of the results that are coming up. So what I'm seeing come together is things like parent involvement, sharing, community, making it a two-way communication, that it requires things like teamwork, but also it includes focusing on things like unity and inclusion and making sure that we're connecting and providing activities that can bring us all together. So one of the ways that we're trying to foster parent engagement and really align on this idea of family voice at South Carolina First Steps, in addition to using the Family Voice Council, is through continuous quality improvement efforts that we do through what we call high quality feedback loops. And so one of the reasons we do this here at South Carolina First Steps is that it's baked into our organization's strategic framework and visions. So here we ensure that all people have the opportunity and resources to be successful and that all voices are solicited and heard. And so what we're trying to do is to implement family-centered changes to our programs and services that we offer, therefore improving the family experience. And by doing this, we want to seek out the voices of those that are often unheard or may not be able to express their needs or views as frequently. And so we're trying to really uphold and center the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion through the work that we're doing. And so again, let me share my screen back to this. So now you'll have another opportunity to answer a question about how familiar you all may be with administering surveys. I know that we may have a diverse audience in here. So if you have experience administering surveys, I'd love to figure out just so I can kind of see what the engagement is in the room. So I know how to best suit this kind of presentation to who's in attendance today. And it looks like we've got some results coming in. So we have some people that are somewhat confident and some that are very confident. And so, as I had mentioned, administering surveys is just one of the ways that we're trying to really bring about this idea of high quality feedback loops within our organization. And so what I'm going to walk through is the 5 steps. Thanks, Sandra. I'm seeing some answers coming in through the chat as well. So here at First Steps, we go through what we call high quality feedback loops. And so we're basing this on principles for Listen for Good, who has been really our coach and thought partner as we've worked to really develop and sustain this idea of getting feedback from our families and our clients in the work that we do. So in the first phase, this is where we're developing a survey that really focuses on the family experience. So we're trying to come up with something that's going to be beneficial for them, figuring out what insight they have that we can learn from in order to make those changes that'll continue to enhance their experience. So in the second phase of the feedback loop, this is where we're tailoring how we're going to send out that survey or collect information from our families. And so in this, we're starting to think about access to technology. Is sending out an online link something that will be accessible to our families, or do we need to go through different methods in order to collect information, such as giving out paper surveys, where we may host these kind of listening sessions with families, and other kind of ways to tailor that context. In the third phase, we have the interpret phase. And so this is where we look at the data that we've gathered and really try to draw key insights. And during this process, this isn't just something that a research team does. This is something where we bring in those relevant stakeholders. This is an opportunity for us to bring in the families and have them give us more contextual information, more insight onto their experience, so we can really make sure that we're making meaning of the data, not putting our interpretation and our bias on them, but really centering and drawing on the family experience. In phase 4, this is where we respond to the feedback that we saw on the survey. So this is where we'll start to think about potential solutions or brainstorming ideas to anything that comes up. So if somebody said that there was a specific area of a program that we could do better at, this is where we may work with those families or other staff or key stakeholders of the program that's being delivered in order to develop these potential solutions. And then in the final phase, this is what's really kind of unique and really important, is closing back this loop. So it's coming up with resources and tools to go back to the families and say, hey, thank you for sharing with us your experience and your feedback. This is what we've heard from you, and this is what we're going to do in response to it. And we want this to be communicated with them in a really transparent way, but also in a way that's familiar language-wise to them. So we want to try to avoid technical jargon and just really trying to focus in on sharing it back in easy and accessible ways. So I'm going to go through each of these phases in a little bit more depth. So that way, if you are a parent coordinator, or if you're on an evaluation team, or even if you're a family member of maybe some type of parent coordination or parent family support team, and you want to think about how to provide data or use kind of this method to improve your program, this is something that you can consider. So in the first phase, we like to think about 2 questions as kind of our guiding framework. One is, what do I want to learn, or what insight do I want to gain from those that I'm reaching out to? And so the other question that we want to think about is, what is in our sphere of control? So when we're thinking about asking questions, we want to think about things that we can take action upon. So some questions that we may ask may bring about easy or low-hanging fruit. So if we want to think about what maybe could an organization do better in terms of parent engagement, then we can ask questions related to that then can be implemented maybe in the next weeks or next months to really see those short-term changes, rather than asking questions that may be broader of how can we improve the K-12 experience. That may produce a lot of really big, high-level responses that'll take longer time to address. And so we want to think about that and consider that when we're really designing these surveys. And so we've partnered with Listen for Good, and we have some core questions that are always on our surveys. The first 3 are, how likely are you to recommend this organization or program to your friend or family member? And so this is how we can figure out who are our ambassadors, who are those families that are potentially going to go out actively in the community, reaching out and promoting the service. And then also those families that may be what some call as detractors. So those are the ones that may be actively going out, but speaking negatively about their experiences. And we can look at our data in a way to see what themes are emerging that are causing those stark differences to occur between those that are actively promoting and those that are having really negative experiences with the programs or services we're offering. And then questions 2 or 3 are, what is your organization good at and what could we do better? So these are opportunities for our families to write in responses. So this is where we get a lot of rich qualitative data from our families. As Rachel had shown earlier, this is where we can kind of pull some of these quotes to see what themes are emerging, which can then be really used to bring back to staff when we think about ideas for implementing solutions. But also it's a really great opportunity to potentially use these kind of data as marketing and outreach efforts as well. Then we often ask questions related to client experience or family experience. So how well are your needs being met? How often are you treated with respect? So we want to really think about respecting the diverse and unique perspectives of all the families. And so if these are areas of the relationship that we need to build upon and work upon, we want to include these questions on our surveys. And then finally, we do ask some demographic questions in order to be able to disaggregate data and see if there are different experiences based on things by gender, race, ethnicity, or any other relevant characteristics. And then we also try to incorporate a couple of other questions that may be unique to the focus of that survey or for a specific program that we're working with. But when we are designing these, we're really trying to keep these short to about 15 questions if possible, just because we know that families have a lot on their plates already. We don't want to burden them by asking them a 20-minute long survey. We do try to keep our surveys to about 5 minutes when we're developing these questionnaires. So in the second phase, this is when we're thinking about how we're sending this out and how we're administering and collecting this information. And so the two common methods are paper and pencil, kind of the traditional way, which has some pros of being really accessible in terms of communities that may not have reliable access to internet. It's also something that if you're already having existing PTA meetings or other opportunities for families to come into your school system, that you can then give this out and do this kind of in an in-person basis. And it may be a little bit lower cost compared to having to purchase an online platform. However, this may place an extra burden on the families of having to potentially send these out or making them do them in person. Whereas there are plenty of online survey platforms that are available that can be used. Some are free, some do have some extra cost available to them, but some of the pros of using the online platforms are that the time for families to complete them is almost instantaneous, because you can send out a link through an email or a text message, and as soon as a family gets that, they can open it up, complete the survey, and the results and data are there on your end, which is beneficial to you on the kind of back end as you're looking at data, because you don't have to spend the time inputting from the paper surveys. However, again, if we're thinking about who you're working with and what communities you're serving, if internet's not really reliable, this may not be the best option to use. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. And oftentimes we here at First Steps will use a combination of both of these approaches in order to make sure that we're reaching the largest population of families across the state. And so another thing to consider when you're trying to solicit feedback from families is whether or not you want to incentivize. And oftentimes we do try to offer some sort of incentive in order to increase participation rate. And as Rachel mentioned, to compensate families for sharing their expertise on something. And so when we're deciding what to incentivize with, we weigh this balance between how much time are we asking them to share and what the value of the incentive is. And so we've had a range of options from things like puzzles or magnet tiles. That was a really popular one with our 4K families, but also we've been able to leverage Rachel and the Family Voice Council to ask families directly, what incentives would you like? And so they gave us some feedback on kind of physical objects that they thought would be useful, but also the fact that experiences are something that would really motivate families to participate. So going to the zoo or to the museum. So that's something to consider if you are trying to compensate families for providing feedback to you for your organization. Maybe providing an experience to a local attraction or event could be something that's really useful. And then so in the interpret phase, this is where we're kind of looking at that data, as I mentioned, thinking about what we've learned. And so here, this is oftentimes the hardest part of really trying to make meaning of the data. So we have quantitative data, which is more of our numbers. And so what I have on the screen is some of the results from a survey we did with our First Steps 4K families. And so what we found was that 88% would highly recommend First Steps 4K to a friend or family member, and that about 66% were more aware of developmental milestones for their 4K student because their student was enrolled in First Steps 4K. And this was from our fall survey in 2021. And so this is something we send out on a yearly basis, and we'll be getting ready to send out to our 4K families again this fall. So these are some of the kind of number data that we look at. But then, as I mentioned, we also have this opportunity to really get some rich qualitative data. And so we asked families, what is First Steps 4K good at? And they said the two major themes were teaching and preparing kids for school and interacting with children and their parents. And so we also asked, what could First Steps 4K do better? And one of the things we heard was communicate more with parents on student progress and provide more activities for parent engagement. And so when we looked at this as a team, we were kind of struggling with, we've kind of got to balance, how are we doing good at interacting with children and parents, but parents want us to do better at communicating more. So what is this kind of relationship or the dichotomy of communication between families and their school teachers? And so this is where we invited our parents to participate in focus groups and kind of dig really deep into what they were expecting or would like to see from us. And so we have some examples of quotes from the focus groups and surveys that were provided by families. So in the dark blue, these are kind of themes of what is First Steps 4K good at. So we can see that one parent said that they're good at interacting with parents and good at helping kids make tremendous progress from where they started to where they came. And then another parent mentioned specific outcomes that their child learned from participating in 4K related to learning to write their name and stay on track. And then when we look at the lighter blue shaded squares, we see quotes related to what 4K could do better. And this was communicating with parents, engaging with parents, interacting with parents, and communicating with families to make sure everything is going well. And when we boiled it down, it was that parents didn't feel like they were receiving enough communication on an ongoing basis about how their student was doing. On like a weekly basis. They wanted more kind of touch points. And this was something that they felt was potentially disrupted due to COVID. So the ability for them to go into the classrooms was diminished. So they weren't feeling like they had some families were feeling like they had a keen sense or keen awareness of what was going on in the classrooms. Aside from just seeing papers put in their children's backpack, they didn't really have an idea of like what was going on curriculum wise or kind of what they were expected to do in order to support their students learning at home on a weekly and ongoing basis. So on this slide here, after doing all of this data analysis with our focus groups and through the survey, what we do for our community is we create these reports. We try to make them a combination of data visualization, as well as some of these quotes, and try to make them highly visual. So that way we can post these out onto our websites. So that way our families can see them, our providers can see them, as well as staff and any other stakeholders in the community. So this is an example, again, of one of the ones that we had created from the fall. And then in the respond phase, we worked together with those families and our internal First Steps 4K staff to think about what changes were being made for the 2021 and 2022 school year. And so based on that idea of wanting to have more feedback about the students' progress, First Steps 4K offered parent-teacher progress reports and conferences for the remaining progress reports that were administered. And then in the 2022 and 2023 current school year, there's sign-in sheets that were collected for orientation. And this was designed because orientation is really where families learn more about the expectations of the program, the milestone, how parents and teachers in that specific classroom will be communicating if they're using classroom management tools like Bright Wheels or Blooms or Ready Rosie. But then also 4K centers were provided with templates so that they could use monthly or quarterly newsletters or bulletin boards to be able to outline to parents what's going on in the classroom or in the center on a more recurring basis. And so in the final phase, we close the loop, and we do this through a kind of a variety of resources. So one way is that we do a data debrief So this is where we bring in the staff and kind of talk through the results, but we also talk to them about how they're going to communicate this with their families. As I mentioned, we also make these resources available, these one-pagers that we post online, and we also provide discussion materials of how we can potentially use tools like this response that's on the screen in order to share back with families. So families who participated, this was sent out to them to show what we heard in a kind of high arching summary of what could be improved, and then what we were going to do in response to that. And so, as I said, this was sent out to families as well as posted on our website. And in addition to posting just on the website, we kind of keep these on a repository so that others can go back and see an archive of a history of what we've done. And so what we've learned is that we really need to look at identifying barriers that prevent families to engaging in these opportunities and really meeting families where they're at, thinking about how we can offer incentives that honor the time commitment that families are going to give in order to give feedback, and then thinking about the language that we're using whenever we're designing these surveys or opportunities for families to give feedback on our programs, not just making sure it's accessible and or translated into multiple languages, but also using words that families are using in the programs or in the schools. So oftentimes when we're designing those, we may use a lot of technical terms, but really utilizing things like the Family Voice Counselor, asking your families to look at a draft of the survey and say, hey, did this wording make sense? Or should we call this meeting or conference something else that would be more familiar to you and your community? Can be a really helpful tool in order to try to get more responses and more authentic responses whenever implementing these loops. So I know that was a lot of information and a high level overview, but we are happy to answer any questions that may come up.
If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask aloud.
And we'd also love to hear from you about how you're engaging and working with families in your schools and work settings.
We do have one comment in the chat that says, I love how this feedback process can be used for all initiatives and projects and not just for early childhood related programs.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to share kind of what their roles are potentially of some of these participant members in the room, so we can hear, as Rachel said, maybe how we can brainstorm ways to implement this with you all, or hear about your experience collecting family voice. We'd love to hear that from you all.
I also dropped a link in the chat for you to be able to meet our members at the Family Voice Council, and their bios and photos are listed on the Early Childhood website. Also wanted to mention that earlier that Lexi was talking about online survey platforms. Here at First Steps, we use SurveyMonkey. And I know that for some, especially if you're at a smaller location, or you might not have evaluation built into your budget, you might be looking for a lower cost solution. At an agency I used to run, when we were moving to data, more stakeholder engagement and data driven programming, we used a platform called JotForm, which was really cost effective. And Gwendolyn says that their surveys are done through Microsoft Forms. Google Forms is also something that we have used before and that I've used a lot and seems to work really well as well. Let's see, we have a family liaison here.
Yeah, Google Forms has been really helpful. I recently, if you're struggling for kind of ideas of like thinking about, well, what kind of information do I want to gain? Like what would be relevant? You could use a Google form to just ask that question to families, like what kind of information do you think we should know about, or you think we should share? And just send out a Google form link, and then that can kind of give you ideas. That's what I did at a recent presentation with some parent educators, was asking them, what information do you want to gain from families? And that just generated a whole question bank that we could use. And I mean, it comes up with a lot of really great ideas. And if you're in a school district, maybe this is something that you can share with other family liaisons or parent coordinators in your district in order to get ideas and work together.
And Rachel, my name's Kathleen, and I had a question about your Family Voice Council. And the question was, I know you'd mentioned that it was really family led and they get to really make some decisions about it. A little bit about how much your role as your organization helps facilitate that versus how much you let the group itself make decisions, and how you kind of help support them with your staffing, but yet still let them have flexibility.
I hear you use the word let, and I don't use the word let, because we're not letting them, they're leading us. And so one of the things that I'm a social worker, and so my background has really been around client leadership, as we call it, and client driven care. And so I use that framework from my background, my training, in this new role that really is unique to South Carolina. I didn't really talk about the 2-gen approach. 2-gen really means whole family practice, but it does look at innovation, and the entire focus of it is equal relationships with families at the center. And the purpose of that is for a system to change, it has to take into account the people who it impacts. And that's really the alignment work that we're doing in the early childhood system, is to that end, to make sure that if our goal is great outcomes for families, families know what they need. And so and I'll ask Lindsey to speak to this too, about, I at the end of every meeting, I send out a survey to the families, if they choose to respond, to let me know what they want in future meetings. I've asked numerous times, like, what are your interests? What things do you care about? We try to build that into the agenda. And when they tell me things like, I want to hear from so-and-so, then my job is to support them by going out and emailing and calling so-and-so, to let them know what the Family Voice Council is, how we operate, that they're coming to listen to families and receive this input, because there's the twofold sort of give and take of, like, I can't control what the other programs do with the information that they receive from families, but I can influence and use our role as leaders in the early childhood system to, like Lindsey said, bring this bridge from the families to that, to sort of shepherd that relationship. And I feel like we have had really good reception among a lot of the agencies that we've spoken to, because I think there is this greater movement towards listening. DSS, for example, is really doing a lot of work with what they call GPS across all systems to have more client-driven care. And that is something we're also looking at, and that we've had conversations about as the Family Voice Council, is to look at ways we can have like deeper entrenchment and deeper relationships with different agencies, and ways that families can have like more conversations with different agencies and different like committees on those agencies to do more collaborative work. I've been rambling, so I don't know if that fully answers the question. And Lindsey, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add there.
No, you answered that perfectly.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was
I
very
really-
helpful. I was trying to figure out, the difference between like the leading versus the facilitating versus the supporting roles, and how you manage that as an organization. So that was perfect.
Yeah, really. And when I was brought on, my, part of the discussion was that, like, I am support staff for the Family Voice Council. I'm not their leader. I'm not their coordinator. I'm their administrative support staff. They are the leaders in the Family Voice Council. I sort of like facilitate in so much as I send out the surveys and look at what they're saying and bring people in. And that's mostly to relieve that burden from them, but also, be their direct support in what they've asked for.
All right. I don't see any additional questions in the chat. I'd like to thank you, Rachel, Lexi, and Lindsey, for sharing your expertise with us this afternoon. Right now, we are going to close out this session. We do have one more keynote for the day. We're going to end with remarks from Dr. Green, Superintendent for Fairfield County Schools, and Mr. Jameson, our South Carolina Teacher of the Year. And that will be back in the main Zoom room. So that first link that you received that you were in this morning, you'll use that link to get back to the main room. And in the chat, Kathleen has dropped in, she's dropped in the link for that room. So if you can't find your link and you need to re-register to get the link, you can do so using that in the chat. If you have any other questions, Lexi has posted in the chat their email addresses, so feel free to reach out. And if that is all, we will see you in the next room. The next session begins at 2:00. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all.